Okay, thank you for coming. We are going to finish up the study of the Amidah as a meditation today, finishing up our understanding of the first bracha and how that is to be used as a meditation. And then in a few minutes, I will give you a preview of what's going to happen next week. So let me start off first by sharing the screen and taking a look at the website for a quick second. I have been asked about access to the books. Which the books? Is there a recommended reading list type of thing? And yes, there is. I just want to bring everybody's attention to the website where we have additional resources and we have our recommended reading list. And all the books that I cover are listed on here. So that's one place you could find them. And in addition to the class notes, which are posted. So I recommend that. And I just want to remind everybody that the websites that I link to are also here. And you could find the Divrei Torah of Rabbi Sachs, and these are my primary sources for ideas. So they're all there. Feel free to use them. If you have a few minutes, browse, and I bet you will find something very interesting. Okay, let's get to today's notes. Okay, our agenda for today. We will complete our study of the Amidah's meditation. And we're also going to continue our study on best practices for your own personal meditation. And in particular, focus on the problems you might encounter when meditating. And today, we'll start with fear. When I sent out the text messages to remind people about this class, I mentioned we were going to talk about fear, and somebody responded, fear? What does fear have to do with meditation? Surprisingly, as we'll find out, it's a big factor. People get afraid sometimes. So we're going to discuss that. As a preview for what's coming up, as of next week, we're going to be discussing the meditative techniques employed by the prophets and the mystics, starting with Bodhidut, otherwise known as isolation. And we're going to be using meditation and the Bible. This was the first book that Rabbi Kaplan wrote about meditation. It's a blockbuster. It's an interpretation of the Bible, second to none. It is remarkable how he found all these references to meditation and what the prophets and the mystics were doing. That's what we're going to start next week. And we're going to have a number of classes on that. And just so you know, Pesach comes on the weekend, the beginning and the end on Sunday. So what we're going to be doing is meeting on Wednesdays those weeks, but you'll be getting a notice about the schedule. Okay, just to review the questions that people have been asking that are still in progress. One was, I'm curious about purchasing and repurchasing Konei HaKol, that reference in the first blessing of the Amidah. How do we understand that? Who is God purchasing it from, so to speak? Another question, what does Judaism say about astrology, or what we call mazalot, the constellations, and can the Messiah be a woman? I do track the questions that people ask, and I research them. And in some cases, I have ready-made resources. In other cases, I find resources. So they're all in development. And when I have enough information to present a substantive point of view, I will. So stay tuned for that. Okay. Okay. We've already had a review in the Amidah, so we're going to go right here to the Amidah's meditation, King, Helper, Melech, Ozer, Umashia, Umagain. King, Helper, Rescuer, and Shield, 4 words that bring God closer to the worshiper. This is going to be an initial understanding of what Rabbi Kaplan means by God consciousness. We talked about that last week. What he said was, he said, we believe that God will bring a Redeemer who will make the world a safe and sane place to live. We have faith that there will come a time when all humanity will be brought back to the God consciousness that the patriarchs enjoyed, and that this will be a time of universal peace and good for all humankind. This is our ultimate hope in the future. Okay, whatever that is, God consciousness, don't know. But he says this will be the prevalent mental state of all humanity, not just Jews, when the Mashiach comes, when the Messiah comes. So we're going to take a stab today at understanding what God consciousness is. And as we go through our studies, we'll take other stabs at it. Okay. How does that relate to the end of the Amidah with these 4 words? Let's find out. This is what he says here in Jewish meditation. The first paragraph in the Amidah concludes with 4 words that are designated to bring God closer to the worshiper. These 4 words are King, Helper, Rescuer, and Shield. Melech, Ozer, Mashiach, Magid. Whereas in the first part of this paragraph, we relate to God in a general manner. Here we develop our personal relationship with him. So with these 4 words, we are having a personal communication with God. These 4 words are the key to the entire Amidah. If one says them correctly, one is left in a perfect spiritual space for the rest of the service. Even if one has said the first parts of this paragraph without proper concentration, if these 4 words are said properly, they will bring the worshiper to such a closeness to God that the rest of the Amidah will be perfect. If one cannot say the entire first paragraph at the rate of 7 seconds per word, as mentioned earlier, one should at least do so for these 4 words. Okay, it's high-level stuff, a perfect spiritual space, okay? Even saying the words without concentration, without kavana, if they're said properly, whatever that means, we will be so close to God that the rest of the Amidah will be perfect. One would have to think that this closeness to God represents God consciousness. And if you cannot say the entire first paragraph at the rate of 7 seconds per word, as mentioned earlier, one should at least do so for these 4 words. So if you recall, he figured out with the amount of words that are in the Amidah that if you said one word, Baruch, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Atah, that pace, it would take an hour to recite the Amidah with the 19 blessings. 18, then they added 1. And as I mentioned, I've gone as far as half an hour. So I probably said a word once every 3 or 4 seconds. It's hard. Okay, and he says that, okay, you have to build up to that, but even if you can't say the whole Amidah or even the whole first blessing, at least say these 4 words, Melech, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, Ozer, and so on. Okay. I suggest you try this. And I suggest that with some kind of, anytime you say a blessing or a prayer, whatever you're familiar with, lighting candles, saying the Shema, try this out. This will be a great meditation habit because one reason is because it will make it'll help you concentrate. You'll have text in front of you, or you'll know the words of the blessing. So it'll be easier for you to stay focused on something. You know the words, you're reading the words, and get into the habit of stretching it out. It'll test your powers of concentration It's a great way to build powers of concentration. This is a very good way to say blessings and prayers that you know as a meditation. Okay, to continue. Let's look at these 4 words in detail. The first word is king, melech. We begin by looking at God as our king and at our relationship to him as that of a subject to a king. A king is far away in his capital city, in his palace. If you want something from the king, you must send him a formal request, and it goes through his staff, his ministers, his secretary. Then, if you are lucky, after a few months, you may get a reply. Therefore, when we address God as king, we see him as majestic but distant. Help is available from him, but not closely available. Okay, so there's God is there. Okay. In the next word, we address God as helper, ozer. Now we see him as much closer than a king. A helper is someone whom we can readily approach. He is a friend whom we know we can always call on and who always will make himself available. Therefore, when we call God helper, we realize that we can call on him at any time and he will be there for us. This is a relationship much closer than that to a king. In saying this word, we are beginning the process through which we draw close to God. So the king is over there. The helper is not necessarily here, but he could be. Third, we address God as rescuer, Moshiach. Again, a rescuer is much closer than a helper. A rescuer is someone who is available to save you when you are drowning in a river. He is right there to jump in and pull you out. A helper may have the best intentions in the world, but if he is not close to you at all times, he cannot save you when you are in danger. Therefore, when we speak to God as our rescuer, we see him as being available whenever we need him, ready to rescue us in an instant. We recognize that God is always close enough to help us, even when we are in imminent danger. Thus, the relationship of rescuer is much closer than that of helper. This word brings us yet a step closer to God. So the helper is generally available. The rescuer is available right now, imminently. Finally, we speak to God as our shield, Magen. A shield is even closer than a rescuer. A shield can help even when an arrow is flying at me and there is nothing else that can stop it. When the arrow is flying, there is no time for even the rescuer to intercept it. The shield must be there in place, right in front of me. Thus, when I address God as my shield, I can feel him right in front of me. God is all around me, surrounding me like a suit of divine armor. I am totally aware of God's protective power, surrounding me on all sides. I feel that I am being protected by God so that nothing in the world can harm me. Shield right here. So what Rabbi Kaplan has done is he's drawn us through a process of a king that's distant, a helper that's closer but not yet available, a rescuer that's available anytime, and a shield that's right there. Even if nobody gets to you, if nobody else gets to you, it's right here protecting you. That's God, the closeness to God. So he's describing a multi-layered understanding of God, and saying those 4 words brings you from the outermost connection to the innermost connection. Thus, in the 4 words, king, helper, rescuer, and shield, we become more and more aware of God's closeness. First, we see him as a benevolent but distant king, then as a willing helper, then as a nearby rescuer, and finally as an imminent shield. In these 4 words, we make the transition from viewing God as a remote transcendental force to seeing him as a protector who is closer than the air around us. So this, by the way, is why we have taken a deep dive to try to understand not just the definition of the words in this prayer, but a concept and an idea behind them. You simply can't elevate your consciousness by repeating the words. Now, Rabbi Kaplan says, I think, that some words have this power that they can alter your consciousness just by saying them. He kind of alluded to it here, and he mentions it in other places. Okay, but that's a different type of meditation. That's like a sub-verbal or maybe a sub-cognitive meditation or experience. Okay, good. What we're talking about here, though, is a specific type of meditation where there's a clear understanding of the ideas that you're saying. It's a different type. I just need to check my... Okay, good. The one person who reached the level where he could constantly see God as his shield was Abraham. God had told him, "Do not fear, Abram. I am a shield to you." Actually said that. That's where we get the phrase Magen Avraham. From that time on, Abraham had a constant perception of God as his shield. Constant. He was always aware of God being very close to him, surrounding him and protecting him on a most imminent and direct level. It is for this reason that the first paragraph ends with the blessing, "Blessed are you, Hashem, shield of Abraham," and makes us aware that such a level of God consciousness exists and that it can even be woven into a way of life, as in the case of Abraham. So this is another reason why this thing is cognitive. This bracha and this approach are cognitive, and why there needs to be an understanding of the words, because it ends, Baruch atah Hashem Magen Avraham. We're reminding ourselves that it's possible to achieve this God consciousness because Avraham did it. So we need to have this understanding of what we're saying there to achieve that. Okay. Of all the levels of relationship to God, the level of shield is the closest. Here we see God close enough to us to stop even a flying bullet. This was the level attained by Abraham, and at this point in the Amidah, we aspire to it. By the time we have reached the end of the paragraph, we have raised our consciousness of God's immanence considerably. At the beginning of the blessing, we were aware of God's immanence, but only in an abstract sense. At the end, our consciousness of God's immanence is such that it is tangible and palpable as a shield. To indicate our awareness, we bow a second time. There's bowing involved. Okay. So this is one example of God consciousness. And it's achieved through saying the Amidah, and in particular this first paragraph, in a specific way with a specific understanding. Now, obviously, since Rabbi Kaplan said that when Messiah, Messiah, when he comes, everybody's going to have God consciousness. That's going to be the prevalent mentality. So does that mean that everybody's going to have to be saying the Amidah? I mean, Avraham didn't say the Amidah. So the answer has to be no. The answer is there has to be a wide variety of ways to achieve God consciousness. This is a key one for Jews, but there's got to be others. So that's why our lessons about this, saying the Amidah here, in particular the first bracha, I've identified as one of probably a lot of ways of achieving God consciousness. So we'll have to find out what the other ones are as we go. Okay. Well, so that concludes our study at this time of the Amidah as a meditation. And in particular, our focus on using the first blessing as a meditation, putting in the time beforehand to understand everything, how you say it, and we talked about when you say it, and your position when you say it, and your dress when you say it, and your attitude when you say it. It's a big mix. So you can see that the stage has to be set for a successful meditation. Okay. Let us continue. Best practices for meditation. We'll talk about problems, in particular fear. Surprisingly, fear is part of meditation, pops up. Why? And this is Bhante. States of fear sometimes arise during meditation for no discernible reason. It is a common phenomenon, and there can be a number of causes. You may be experiencing the effect of something repressed long ago. Remember, thoughts arise first in the unconscious. The emotional contents of a thought complex often leak through into your conscious awareness long before the thought itself surfaces. If you sit through the fear, the memory itself may bubble up to a point where you can endure it, or you may be dealing directly with the fear that we all fear, fear of the unknown. At some point in your meditation career, you will be struck with the seriousness of what you're actually doing. You are tearing down the wall of illusion you have always used to explain life to yourself and to shield yourself from the intense flame of reality. You are about to meet ultimate truth face to face. That is scary, but it has to be dealt with eventually. Go ahead and dive right in. A third possibility, the fear that you are feeling may be self-generated and may be arising out of unskillful concentration. You may have an unconscious program to examine what comes up. Thus, when a frightening fantasy arises, concentration locks onto it, and the fantasy feeds on the energy of your attention and grows. The real problem here is that mindfulness is weak. If mindfulness was strongly developed, it would notice that this switch of attention as soon as it occurred and handle the situation in the usual manner. No matter what the source of your fear, mindfulness is the cure. Observe the fear exactly as it is. Don't cling to it. Just watch it rising and growing. Study its effect. See how it makes you feel and how it affects your body. When you find yourself in the grip of horror fantasies, simply observe those mindfully. Watch the pictures as pictures. See memories as memories. Observe the emotional reactions that come along and know them for what they are. Stand aside from the process and don't get involved. Treat the whole dynamic as if you were a curious bystander. Most important, don't fight the situation. Don't try to repress the memories or the feelings or the fantasies. Just step out of the way and let the whole mess bubble up and flow past. It can't hurt you. It's just a memory. It is only fantasy. It is nothing but fear. When you let fear run its course in the arena of conscious attention, it won't sink back into the unconscious. It won't come back to haunt you later. It will be gone for good. This man is very insightful. Let's review this again. So point number one is, he's saying that we got all kinds of stuff bubbling below the surface in the subconscious. And there's substance to that. There's images, there's pictures, but there's also feelings about it. And as he says, the way the dynamics are, and he's an expert meditator, so he would know that the emotional stuff about that, the emotional embodiment of these particular thoughts pops up first from the subconscious. So you start feeling the emotion even before you know what the emotion is related to, what picture or thought or idea. And that's how you're like, I'm feeling afraid, but I don't know why. They kind of leak to the surface. But then if you just remain in a meditative state, then up pops the actual contents of the fantasy or the thought. I've had this all the time. You're like, whoa. And then, and as he says, then with whatever dream or fantasy or odd thought or scary thought you had or problem you had, the little video of it starts running through your mind. And as he says, concentration can lock into it, and the fantasy feeds on the energy of your attention and grows. That's real. It could start off as just a passing little picture of something you don't like, but because you focus on it, it gets bigger and scarier, and it starts becoming a full movie. And you're like, oh my God. And then you snap out of it, like, whoa, that was just a bad thought. And it goes. He's right. It just leaves. But you become aware of many things. You become aware of the stuff that's below the surface, and you become aware of the powers of your mind, that you can make a mountain out of a molehill. It's just a little bitty dumb thought, and you built it into something crazy, and you can see how it becomes so powerful, and it affects you so deeply. But because you have some measure of skill in detaching yourself, you finally pull yourself out and you're like, let that go. It's like you get up in front of, you're watching the scary movie, you finally say, forget about this. You just turn it off or you walk out of the room. That's the skill we're trying to develop here. So that's why he says, you stand aside from the process and don't get involved. Let it ride. Treat the whole dynamic as if you were a curious bystander. Most important, don't fight the situation. You don't sit there and say, get out of here, go, 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 go. You just say, fine, it's a scary thought, goodbye. Step out of the way and let the whole mess bubble up and flow past. It can't hurt you. It is just memory. It is only fantasy. It is nothing but fear. Can you imagine if you had the skill to do that in day-to-day activity? Somebody bugs you, a driver, whatever it is, and you get this reaction. Can you imagine if you had the skill sufficient to say, fine, let it run, go fine. I don't want it to bother me. That's what you develop in meditation. Okay. Okay, interesting. We're going to meditate now. Let's stop this recording. How are we going to do that?